my 150 square foot shop, making full use of available space is essential. Given my compact layout, I need to make tool storage as efficient and modular as possible. For this reason, installing French cleats felt like the obvious choice. When designing the layout of my shop, I purposely kept as much of the wall space free above waist height, even breaking convention by putting my dust collection pipe down below bench height. The plan is to put up as many cleats as possible, both in the main shop and also in an adjoining storage space. I'm going to use two sizes of cleat with spacing to match. A 60mm face cleat in the shop on a single screw and an 80mm face cleat on a double screw for the storage area. The large size being primarily so I can use it for storing lumber. Now let's break down some sheets.
When I was deciding the layout of my small shop, I kept in mind needing to break down sheets, placing my table saw and outfeed table as a central island. With this setup, I simply pull the table saw apart from the outfeed table, then place an insulation sheet on top to make a sacrificial cutting surface. I can then bring the birch ply sheet in and with some effort pivot it up onto the insulation board. With the sheet in place and track saw in hand, I use a rail square to get two reference edges and then use a parallel guide to section the ply. I'm going to use the table saw to get to final dimensions, but given my 2-foot cut capacity, the track saw is ideal to section the ply into more manageable pieces first, whilst also maximising sheet utilisation. For the 80mm face cleat, this means cross-cutting the sheet into 4 lengths of 595mm, which assumes a table saw blade curve of 3.2mm and allows for a small error margin. For the 60mm face cleat, it's the same approach, but the sections are now cut to 538mm. From these sections, we now move to the table saw and do a second set of yet narrower crosscuts. For the 80mm cleats, and using our same blade curve, we cut at 145.2mm, and for the 60mm cleats, we cut slightly narrower at 105.2mm. Our blanks are now ready to be cut into cleats, where we put the table saw blade at 45 and position the fence so that each blank is cut exactly in half. On my saw, the fence for 45-degree cuts needs to be on the left. With that in place, I then line the board up by eye, where I want the left of the blade to make contact with our board at 62mm for the 80mm cleat and 42mm for the 60mm cleat. Done right, this will create two cleats which are mirror images of each other. We can now run all of our blank boards through the same cut, and in no time at all, we'll have a big stack of cleats. It's worth noting that a full sheet of birch ply will yield 32 80mm face cleats or 42 60mm face cleats at the 4-foot width, give or take. Before cutting the cleats to final width, we want to rip down to take the sharpness off the 45-degree edge. I took off a full 3mm, which leaves a nice smart ledge finish, which will also be resistant to damage. My plan is to fit the cleats to the ply sheathing in my storeroom and workshop. When I installed the sheathing, I needed to scribe into the corners and also used a shadow gap between sheets to help deal with varying thicknesses of the battens that were behind the sheets as well as the ply sheets themselves. This means a custom length for each cleat. With the cleat at target width, I then pre-drilled and countersunk the fixing holes so I could get a clean finish for the 5x70mm decking screws I used. Screws were positioned to line up with the wall sheet fixings, as these in turn matched up with the batten positions. After a quick sanding, the cleat is ready for installation. When offering the cleat to the wall, I used a laser to position the first row, which I then pinned with brads before driving in the screws. Subsequent rows are positioned with a spacer block to achieve the desired spread. On the rows where there are sheathing screw holes, I again used brads to make sure that the cleat didn't walk when driving in the screws. In my case, after some experimentation, I settled on 130mm spacing for the larger cleat and 75mm spacing for the narrower one. I lastly chose to add some waxhaw finish so that the cleats would match and blend into my birch ply walls.
It's now a few weeks since I put the cleats up, and so far the size, spacing and position have been working well. I've also built my first few cleat fixtures of various types, although still loads more to do. If you're thinking about cleats, realize that it's quite a labor-intensive process to get them all cut and installed. Two suggestions I have here are firstly to calculate your needed quantity of cleats up front and then section all of your sheets as a batch before taking to the table saw. This will mean a consistent set of cut dimensions versus moving the table saw fence back and forth. Also, for the first row, I can't recommend using a laser. It's too easy for you to introduce an error here. Instead, I would cut a pair of long spacers and use your workshop floor, if it's level that is, to serve as your reference. If you're the kind of woodworker who likes the idea of creatively designing different fittings for each of your tools, and of course optimizing efficiency, then cleats are definitely for you. I'm putting together a content series covering a wide range of cleat fittings for your tools. If you're looking to get some cleat inspiration, and in particular if you have a shape or origin, then you can check out the first of this series right here.